So in that sense, I want to democratize the story of innovation. I want to make it clear that anyone can do it.
The basic question that a writer asks, I think, is, what should I write about? And, that's the biggest question. There's no help for you either. And it's a total mystery.
But what is common throughout history, throughout time, is that when you have that upstairs, downstairs thing, there's a certain amount of that you can maintain if you're on top through hard power and hard system.
We're absolutely delighted to be back here with our edition, albeit digitally, of JLF Houston. There are so many wonderful authors and speakers who you will hear over the next few days. And I hope they will power your imagination as they have ours to look into the future, into a brighter tomorrow.
On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, Sanjoy Roy, and all my colleagues at Team Arts, Asia Society, and Imprint, we welcome you to the fourth session of Day 2 of JLF Houston 2021 Virtual Festival. Rebel with a Cause: The Paradox of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Vinita Sud Belani, Kunal Basu, Firdaus Azim, and Sadaf Saz in conversation. Michael Madhusudan Dutt led an extraordinary life rebelling against the status quo, believing that the world was his for taking, not wanting to be held back by convention or where he was from. Grappling with many of the issues we are facing today, he deeply believed in his ability to transcend his beginnings, confident that his voice could traverse linguistic and cultural boundaries to achieve literary greatness internationally. He ultimately was able to imbibe influences from everywhere into the very core of Bangla literature. Exploring his international sensibilities, along with his intense, deep-rooted engagement with Bangla, the panel looks forward to celebrating the genius of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, along with exploring questions of identity, linguistic nationalism, and innovation. Vinita Sud Belani. An actor, director, producer, and writer, Vinita Sud Belani is the founding artistic director of US theater production house EnActe Arts and a board member at several nonprofits. Belani transitioned to an arts career after 20 years in technology in the corporate world. She holds a CS degree from Pilani and an MBA from HEC, France. Kunal Basu. Kunal Basu is the author of several critically acclaimed novels, including The Miniaturist and Calcutta. The Japanese Wife, from his collection of stories by the same name, has been made into an award-winning film. He has also written novels in Bengali and for cinema. Firdaus Azim. Firdaus Azim is a professor of literature in the Department of English and Humanities at Brack University. She is also an executive member of Nari Pokho, a leading feminist organization in the country. Her works include The Colonial Rise of the Novel, a special edited volume with Nivedita Menon and Deena Siddiqui of the Feminist Review, Negotiating New Terrains, South Asian Feminisms, Volume 91, 2009, and a special issue of the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, Volume 11, Number 2, 2011, entitled Islam, Culture and Women. Sadaf Saz. Sadaf Saz is a poet, writer, entrepreneur, and a women's rights advocate. She co-founded DLF in 2011 and has been a driving force since its inception. Sadaf is the author of a collection of poems, Sari Rems, and a monologue series, Je Kotha Jaina Bola, That Which Cannot Be Said. Sadaf runs several businesses, including an arts management company, Jatrik, which has managed DLF since 2011. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. In these difficult times, we have struggled to bring you JLF Houston 2021 without charging a registration fee. Please support as generously as you can to ensure a free, seamless, and continuous flow of knowledge. Simply click on the Support JLF option button on the right-hand side of your screen, and your contribution is greatly appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebel with a Cause: The Paradox of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Vinita Sud Belani, Kunal Basu, Firdaus Azim, and Sadaf Saz in conversation. Over to you, Sadaf.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be in conversation about this poet extraordinaire, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, who I've been fascinated about for many, many years, and was very excited when Namita Gokhale and Malashri Lal came out with this play, Betrayed by Hope, which I think is the kind of inspiration behind this session. And I would actually go to Namita and Malashri to say a few words before we restart our conversation.
I'm delighted to be here today to add a few brief words to this session. The Bangla poet Michael Madhusudan Dutt, born 200 years ago in colonial India, was an outlier, a man much before his time. Cosmopolitan to the core, he exemplified the idea of world literature in the effortless way he straddled different languages and cultures. As a writer, I am sometimes possessed by a literary figure or a literary moment and cannot break loose of that spell until I have paid some form of homage, some tribute. I worked with my friend, Dr. Malashri Lal, on a play based on his letters that reflected Michael Madhusudan Dutt's tragic and Promethean life. Titled Betrayed by Hope, it records his journey of alienation and the return to his roots. Here was a man not afraid to swim against the tide. His life mirrors the rites of passage of other writers and poets with fractured and hyphenated cultural identities. I look forward to what promises to be a deep and brilliant exploration of this restless spirit, this heroic spirit, and all that remains current and contemporary about his battles and his dilemmas. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm indeed delighted to say a few words about the book that Namita Gokhale and I published last year. It's Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Now, I'm sure many of you know that Michael Madhusudan Dutt was a pioneer poet in Bengali. But what many people may not be aware of is the struggle of his life as he was trying to contend between his education in English literature, his love for England, a kind of an exclusion by the British gentry, reviewers, etc., who were not quite willing to accept his talent and his poetic output. And then the transition that he makes from innovating with Bengali verse and then becoming one of the greatest writers of his time. But when we chose Michael Madhusudan Dutt as our subject, we also wanted to portray him in a contemporary light, because it's one thing to see the person in his time, but it's much more important to see how he relates to us. And this is when Namita and I came up with the counterpoint character of the young researcher from Bangladesh, that's Rubina Rahman. So Rubina is struggling with her own sense of identity, again, an English education, but given in post-colonial times. And she, while she's researching the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, is also interrogating her own value systems, her own life, issues of psychology, of gender relations, of class, of mobility, of all kinds of conflicts that she herself is facing in the context of modern times. So that's how our book shaped up. The innovative part, I think, is also that we used Michael's letters, something that has been available in the published world, but is not really looked at. The letters contain the drama of the intimacy of Michael's life. And as Rubina reads through those letters, thinks about Michael, that's the drama we bring to the stage. And there is a surreal and very involved engagement of the poet from yesteryears and this young woman from our times. So enjoy the play, enjoy the session.
So I'm just delighted to have you all here to discuss the subject, which I think is very close to all of our hearts. And I would actually like to start with Kunal here. You know, when we are looking at Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the man, the greater than life persona, I would also actually, I think, initially like to discuss the work itself, and give everyone a kind of sense of you know, why he is regarded as such a great figure in Bangla literature. Maybe you could first start off with some of your reflections on this.
Thank you, Sadaf. Oh, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, where do I begin? You know, growing up in Bengal, growing up in Kolkata, he has occupied such a tremendous space in terms of our consciousness, in terms of our taste, determining our taste in literature, and has continued to do so. As you very correctly said, when we speak about Michael, his personality, his towering personality, the different clefts of his life oftentimes come to fore. But obviously we remember him for the great work that he did. So how does one place Michael in the context not simply of Bangla Sahitya or Indian literature, but also in the context of world literature? Now, both Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, one of the fathers of Bengali prose, as well as Rabindranath Tagore, has said that Meghnad Bad Kabya is one of the greatest works of world literature. They had no doubt in their mind that Michael wasn't simply speaking to a local audience and making a local contribution, that his work was a contribution to world literature. So what sort of contribution did he make? Now, he wrote a number of plays, as you know, Shormishtha, Padmavati, Krishna Kumari, Maya Kanon, Eke Ki Bole Shobhota, Budo Shaliker Ghadero, and a few others. He wrote, in his words, epic poems, such as Tilottama Shambhav, Meghnad Bad Kabya, Birangana Kabya. He wrote sonnets, a wonderful collection of sonnets called Chaturdashpadi Kavitavali. Okay. The work that most exemplifies Michael's talent is obviously Meghnad Bad Kabya. It is very hard to grow up in India, very hard to grow up in Bengal without ever having heard of Meghnad Bad Kabya. And what Michael did in Meghnad Bad Kabya was indeed the spectacular feat of taking an epic, a world epic, the Ramayana, and turning it around. He did not tell the story of the victor Ram conquering Ravan, but the story of the vanquished. Okay. So he turned it around, and in my opinion, this is the first example in world literature of the anti-hero. This is the first example in world literature of the anti-hero. So he takes the character of Indrajit, who's the youngest son of Ravan, an upright man, a tremendous warrior, a person struck with conscience, a deeply ethical person who must now fight Ram in this epic battle of Ramayana. And Meghnad is the hero of the tale, and Michael makes him the hero of the tale. And he comes very close to defeating Ram. He comes very close to upsetting the flow of the epic, except that he is defeated and killed by an act of treachery. And who performs the act of treachery? The gods. Okay. So here what we see in him are two strains of literary traditions coming together. The one, the great Sanskrit epic poems, and the other, the European works of, European classics of like that of Homer, the writing of Homer. Okay, so yes, he was cosmopolitan, but he was a rooted cosmopolitan. His roots came from his own culture, and he imbibed the traditions of this world, the literary traditions of the world, in giving shape to this remarkable work called Meghnad Bad Kabya. Now, this is a second thing which Meghnad Bad Kabya is important for us to talk about, is that he freed Bengali verse from the prison of rhyme. Okay, so it's written in blank verse. Now, it is not his first work in blank verse, but Shormishta was his first example of blank verse. But in Meghnad Bodh Kabbo, it really reaches the pinnacle of his talent. And so one has to agree, this is one of the greatest works of world literature, where both in terms of the substance of his work and the way of presentation of his work, the stylistic elements of this work, he broke new ground. He simply wasn't breaking ground in Indian writing, he was breaking ground in world writing. Okay. And the other point that to your question that I would like to say is, here is this man who was a polyglot. Okay, so he had facility in Bengali, in English, in Sanskrit, in Hebrew, in Latin, in Greek, in Tamil, and Telugu. Okay, tremendous polyglot, but he also had the facility of dipping into the vernacular idioms. So in addition to the formal classical style of writing of Meghnad Bodh Kabbo, he also wrote plays like Eke Ki Bole Shobhota, Budo Shalikeর Ghadero, which were social satires. And he wrote them in the language of society, of various segments of society, including rural societies of Bengal. Okay, so a towering talent, there's no question, a towering talent which manifested itself only, he lived for 49, he was only 49 when he died. But during this short period of time, the burst of literary output that he had was tremendous. So Michael captures our imagination even hundreds of years after his life, and I'm sure you're going to speak about the kind of person that he was, which brought about this sort of effulgence, literary effulgence, and that itself is an interesting parallel in terms of a person's life and a person's work.
Thanks, Kunal, for that great, I think, wide canvas of bringing out, I think, some extraordinary features of his work. And for those, I would like to bring you in here about your ideas. We were talking about it earlier of how he changed Bangla literature as we knew it, and the kind of extraordinary input that he had in I guess presenting modern Bangla literature to us. And I would also like to know your thoughts on how you see its place in international literature and wider literature, and how I think the other very interesting thing is that this kind of coming together of all his influences, and it coming to fruition in Bangla. Do you feel that was inevitable, or just because of circumstances of his life, brought this about?
Okay, thank you, Sadaf, and it's good to be on this panel, and thank you, Kunal, for that wonderful tribute to the poet. Along with Namita, I think I can say that I have been through a period in my academic career when I was actually obsessed with the figure of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. And the thing that made me obsessed, as I share this with Malasri, I guess, is that we are practitioners, we are teachers of English literature, and this question of English writing and English in our Bengal is always something uppermost in our mind. And growing up in Dhaka and in an atmosphere of linguistic nationalism, Michael Madhusudan Dutt was always held up as an example and as a warning that you cannot make it in English. Look at this very talented man. And it's only when he turned to Bengali, to Bangla, that his inner talents came out. And somehow I want to dispute that. I feel that the terrain that Michael was traversing, and that modernity that was in creation in the mid-19th century, so-called Bengal Renaissance, was not just bilingual, but it was linguistically diverse. And it needed the genius, or maybe the very conscious effort of our poet to be able to traverse all these various, what should I say, ups and downs, crevices and fissures and gaps in that place. Before, in his letters, he's writing about writing Meghnad Bhat Kabbo, where he says that he's looking for a great epic of India, a great epic for India and Bengal. And he would have loved to have written the Karbala story, he says, but he feels unable to do so. And that really struck me, that there is this Kolkata, Bhadralok, English medium, English literature trained person, but in his imaginative cultural life, the story of Karbala, which used to be told in many marsiyas, etc., which later on has been written up as an epic, Bishad Sindhu by Mir Musharraf Hussain, later in the 19th century, that had struck him, that somehow that story would resonate with the people of Bengal. And trying to think what it is about Karbala, and then what is it about Meghnad Bhat that is in common. I felt both were not just, there were stories of defeat, there were stories of the vanquished, and living in colonial India, that kind of defeat, that kind of belonging to a nation that had been conquered by another must have been part of the emotions that engaged, that disturbed him. And that's where the beauty of Meghnad Bhat lies, because we know that the Ramayana story has been told in many, many forms, the many Ramayanas. And having lived in Madras or Chennai, he must have, and knowing Tamil and Telugu, he must have heard the other side of the story as well, from Ravan's side, from the Lankan side, as it were. So he was transforming the story, but I think it becomes a metaphor for India, for the defeated nation, and yet the heroism of that. What strikes me about Meghnad Bhat Kabbo is also that it ends with a picture of a sati. It ends with a Shotidaho being committed. And remember, he is part of the Renaissance. He's part of the movements with the intellectuals of the age, like Rammohn Rai, Vidyasagar, who were engaged in these reformist activities. But this glorification of sati, I also look at as part of the heroism, in a way that, you know, being a feminist, I feel a bit difficult enunciating it in this manner. But yes, there's a heroism in that particular scene. But talking about how he was negotiating his space, his cultural space, his intellectual space, and the political space of Bengal, I think it's very interesting to read the transition from the English to the Bengali writing. And when I look at his English lyrics, which I have tended to dismiss as juvenilia, but which really contain a kind of apprenticeship, a kind of stepping into, getting ready for the real work, which is going to be in Bangla. He says something like, he has a poem that starts, I sigh for Albion's distant shore. And this sighing for what is not there, this kind of colonial desire that is expressed, this longing for a journey, and maybe a longing for breaking all the shackles and the disciplinary structures that contained the middle-class Hindu Bhadralok into another world. Maybe that is what he was longing for. But he also knows the travails of this journey, the travails of this travel. You know, if you read it juxtaposed with another poem that he has called The Slave also envisages a sea voyage as the enslaved person is being wafted across the Atlantic to unknown lands. And so this way of juxtaposing desire with reality, etc., is something that, what should I say, suffuses, permeates through Madhusudan's work. Looking at his Bangla writing, looking at things like his sonnets, Kapotak Khanod, Bongo Bhasha, etc., I'm also struck by, well, in Bongo Bhasha, there is a kind of sense of return. I'm returning back to my motherland, my mother tongue, my mother culture, which I had neglected. I'd neglected all her riches, etc. But in Kapotak Khanod, which is about the river that runs through his birthplace, you wonder how attached he was to that as well, because he grew up in Calcutta. He left Shagurdari when he was a few months old. And as far as I can glean from his letters and the biographies, he went back as a famous poet to be lauded and applauded to his old home. So the Kapotak Khanod was it always comes with Madhusudan, I suppose. The Kapotak Khanod was as ephemeral, as imaginary as Albion's distant shore. So he was, and not only he, I think this creation of an image of home, of somewhere where I can call my own, is part of that colonial alienation that comes in. But I don't want to use this colonial split alienation in a negative term. I want to see this rift as where creativity lies, as where you can bring in Tasso, and you can bring in Dante, and you can bring in Karbala, and you can bring in everything into a potpourri and create a new form of writing, which Madhusudan definitely did. He is our first modern poet, and reading and rereading him tells us a lot about our own kind of fragmented, broken modernity, but also how these broken fragments are brought together into great poetry, into great plays. And I'd like to go back to Eke Ki Bole Sabhyata. I love this title, Is This Civilization? And in this great civilizational debates that were going on, he writes a farce about it. So that is a lot of making fun of your own self as well in that. So yes, I think he is a poet who needs to be read, reread, and I wish we could translate him and really put him into the annals of world literature, where he truly belongs.
Thanks for those. I actually want to go into Vinita now, because you've mentioned the translation and the. So, Vinita, you're based in the USA. You have, I think, made it your mission to take these great writers and storytellers that others that are unknown in the USA, or to a new generation. What particularly about Michael Madhusudan drew you to kind of making it your idea to share his work? He's this Bangla poet, kind of largely unknown, in this day and age. And why do you think that it's so important to know him, and how can younger people get to know him? I think you're on mute.
Sorry. That was an epic question, and I'm going to try to answer it from as many angles as possible. Sri Aurobindo said of Michael Madhusudan Dutt that all the stormiest passions of man were expressed in this gigantic language. So he's somebody who should be known. It's a pity that Tagore is probably one of the few writers of that era who are known outside of India, and everybody else is So for me, some of it is personal. I'm born and brought up in Bengal. I spent my childhood and my early adult years in Kolkata. And I'm a polyglot. I speak, 7 or 8 different languages, 4 European languages, 5 Indian languages. There's, I have some sort of a connect with him there. But I think the bigger story here is that we know in South Asia that we have a treasure trove of stories, of writers, of incredible literature that we've been accumulating for at least 4 millennia, if not more, right? And we know that that is the case in the West as well. There are all the Greek stories, the whole body of Western literature that all of us grew up with because we were colonized and we all went to these, Hindu college kind of schools. At least I did. Some of us did. But what I don't see is an inclusion of our stories in what is considered global storytelling from a Western perspective. And so in my own little way, I'm as quixotic as Michael here in trying to tell the stories of, stories that Michael Madhusudan Dutt created himself, but stories of people like Michael Madhusudan Dutt. I'm really grateful to Namita and to Malashri for actually writing the play about him. It's incredible that they did it in an epistolary play because we actually see the man through his own words. And the juxtaposition that they gave of this young girl from this generation who is fighting some of the same fights that Michael Madhusudan Dutt fought, the fight for identity, for belonging, for an understanding of just the fundamental of the story that could transcend literature or, language or culture. These are struggles that we are still, people in the creative field are still addressing, but these have now, especially in the US, have spilled into everyday life. The notion of diversity in thought, the notion of inclusion, making a place for everybody in a global context. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to make a place for himself in an identity that was fractured. And every immigrant, whether in the US or in Europe or in India, understands that struggle. And so there's my connect.
Thank you so much. And I actually want to bring in Kunal here. Because you write in Bangla and in English, and the kind of challenges to writing for an audience internationally, and in those days, I just can't imagine how he must have struggled, and yet he had this kind of extraordinary, self-confidence, gumption about his own literary genius that he would definitely be able to make it and show them all. I was wondering, what personally kind of connected you to his story and how a lot of his struggles actually had an impact on the work he produced, and how do you also connect to that?
Yeah, a writer's life, in most cases, is a troubled life, largely because writing is a personal process, whereas becoming a writer is a social process. So there's a real distinction between this being and becoming. In becoming, one needs to be discovered, needs to be appreciated. People need to say, yes, this is a worthwhile piece of work. And Michael Madhusudan Dutt certainly didn't have that. He wrote The Captive Lady when he was 25. This was his first foray in terms of writing in English. And if he had persisted, then maybe his subsequent works would have, shown a greater flowering of his, innate talent in English as well. But why did he stop? Is the question that intrigues me. Now, my journey is different. I mean, I want to separate that because I did not go from writing in Bangla to English and then stop writing in one language completely. I write in English and Bangla and English and Bangla and Bangla and English. Okay, so I keep writing in both languages. But my story aside, Michael's story is intriguing because what happened to him? What were the factors that led to his disillusionment, not simply with writing in English, but with European culture? This has been a somewhat of a persistent theme in many of the 19th century journeys. In many of the 19th century journeys of Bengali Bhadraloks, upper class, educated, English educated, really taken in by the romance of Britain, the romance of the West, and traveling there to study. And in Michael's case, it was studying law. Sometimes led to disillusionment because the portrayal of great enlightenment that the educated classes were exposed to in India about the West couldn't be further from truth. Because once in Britain, they encountered racism, prejudice, exclusion, and the works of the empire, okay, which flew in the face of the genteel, the reasoned, the analytical, the view of Western civilization, Western culture that was being portrayed among the colonized. So, curiously enough, in my first novel, The Opium Clerk, I have a Michael kind of a character, and I've never consciously thought that I was trying to model my character around Michael, but subconsciously I might have. When this person, also a Michaelish kind of character from Kolkata, goes to England, very much taken up by the notion of Britain, and enlightenment and so forth, then comes back disillusioned and becomes a freedom fighter. Okay, so Michael's disillusionment was, I think, partly driven by his experience in Britain. He found it very hard to be accepted, or any kind of a positive reception of his writing in English. And he was not alone. I mean, before him, Vivian Desrosiers, another great champion of Bengal Renaissance, was also rejected and spurned. His writing, his English poetry was rejected and spurned in Britain. So Michael as a person wanted acceptance. Which writer doesn't? We all want to be accepted. We want to be loved by readers, by the world of publishers, by the world of reviewers. And Michael found that a very hard nut to crack. If it's a hard nut to crack now, in the 21st century, as many subcontinental writers realize and recognize through their own journeys, just imagine how difficult it was in the 19th century for a Bengali, a person of color, to show up in Britain and say, hey, I've written poetry in English, your language, and I want you to appreciate it, to read it, to understand it. Okay, so he found closed doors, and in a way, it turned him around, and made him come into the world, the rooms of Bengali culture. So these are journeys, not identical journeys, but these are journeys that creative writers have to go through. These are journeys which are not determined. I mean, in one part of my life, I'm an academic, and I always say that it's easier to be an academic than being an author, because I don't mean to demean academics, because I'm an academic myself, but there are set patterns of progress, of journeys. You do this, and then if you do it well, then that's what you get. And if you do something else well, then you get something else. But in the right of a creative writer, as Michael must have recognized in the 19th century, immensely more difficult than it is now. Okay, but nevertheless, those points, those real steep edges, which were very hard to overcome. And this is something which I think, whereas bilingualism is a wonderful gift for people who have it, and Michael certainly had that, it is still not an easy gift to manifest in this world, where we still have very distinct boundaries in terms of who are you? Where are you from? What are you writing about? Which language are you writing about? Is that your language or is it somebody else's language? Okay. And among the many, these many disjunctions of his time, which resonate certainly in many respects with ours, Michael was caught. And thank God he was caught. Thank God he was anguished. Thank God for his distress. Thank God for his failure to become what he actually wanted to be. He wanted to be, a well appreciated, a well established, a country gentleman kind of a person. Okay, but thank God for his failure, because in his failure was born one of the greatest poets that the world has ever seen.
Firdaus, I want to ask you about this. The incorporation of the sonnet and the epic styles that Kunal had also referred to earlier about experimentation within Bangla, with the influence of his exploration of English literature, and how that was that inevitable, that kind of experimentation. Was he exploring that in English and then decided to move it to Bangla, or how did he become the kind of torchbearer of modern Bangla literature?
Okay, but Michael's transition into Bangla happened before he left for England. I mean, when he left for England, he had already become the much acclaimed writer of Meghnad Badh Kabya. So that desire to be a lawyer, to be a barrister, rather than a poet, is something that still puzzles me. Why would anyone want to be that? If you have produced something like Meghnad Badh Kabya, why on earth would you be studying torts and laws and all of that? Why on earth? But so maybe there was something else to his journey. It was to break the shackles of Bengal as well, which he was doing all his life, which he was by converting to Christianity, by becoming a Tajaputro, by doing all these things. He was breaking the norms. He was breaking the boundaries that are set on all of us with class and religion and where we are placed and by our placement. So yes, I think that his incorporation of European literary forms into Bangla has been very creative, has been very successful, has really made Bangla literature modern. But I would like to use this incorporation of European literary forms makes us modern. Is that what defines our modernity, or is there much more than that? And I would argue that there is, because as the other Gitikas and the Birangana Kabya, etc., Madhusudan was involved in literary experimentation all through his life. It's not that he reached the blank verse, the epic blank verse, and that's it. He went back to the old forms of writing, experimented with those when he was writing Birangana Kabya. So that is what I find very, very exciting about Madhusudan. And I'm not a writer. I am merely an academic, but I love to read. And what I find very exciting about Indian writing in English today is this constant search for new themes, new modes of, even let's look at a writer like R.K. Narayan, for instance, how he has made small town India come alive in his stories. And let's go to Salman Rushdie, who then has to use magic realism to make a more cosmopolitan world come alive in his writings, and who also then experiments with phrases like little piece of the moon and all that. There's a constant experimentation. And if there is anything exciting about writing, I don't know why Kunal is saying that it is still a struggle to be recognized. I thought that today's writing is dominated by the others that Europe created through its colonials. So it's the Caribbeans, the Africans, and us who reign in the English literary sphere. So if we can look at Madhusudan as somebody who had inaugurated, who had opened that sphere, I think we can say that yes, English is no longer something that needs recognition by the English or by some kind of center. The center has moved. There are many centers and there are many forms of English being written. But on the subject of the 19th century writer in English, Dirozio Madhusudan, but later in the century, we have a very short-lived woman writer called Toru Dutt, who publishes, who is recognized by somebody like Edmund Goss, who writes the preface to her poems. And somehow these old Indian epic themes of Savitri and Sita are taken to the West in a manner that I think is a progression from the mid-19th to the late 19th century. And even if you were to look at her poetics, her prosody, you will find her more at home in English than these earlier writers. So I think Madhusudan may have given up writing in English, but he had paved the way for others to follow and for English to become part of the Indian pantheon of languages, so that Indian writers do write in English, do write in Bangla, but yeah.
So that's the, you know, I think that's the thing that I wanted to build on with Vinita too, of this idea of, you know, what are we gonna take from, I guess, all of the wide opportunities in literature that, you know, Michael Madhusudan showed us can be achieved and kind of gifted us. And how do you think that younger people and a diverse array of people can you know, be inspired?
It's a question that I'm struggling to answer myself. I want to thank for those for talking about constant experimentation. And I want to say that I am neither a writer nor an academic, though I will never attach the adjective merely to that classification. I'm also not a storyteller. I am, you know, I come from the world of bits and bytes. I'm a very pragmatic businesswoman for the most part. But I have this, I see that unless we own our own stories, unless we tell them in the language that everybody understands, we won't have created a place for ourselves that we can be proud of, that our children can be proud of, that is commensurate with the talent and the nature of the stories that we tell. You know, Firdaus talked a lot about the metaphor of identity. She talked about breaking the shackles of storytelling. She talked about Michael's struggle for identity within this society and that society. And then, you know, Kunal talked about how difficult it was to do this in Bangla, in English, in Bangla. Of course, Kunal now has found the secret formula of doing it in both languages and be successful in both places. So all of these struggles and all of these questions of identity, you know, 200 years down the line, we are still working on breaking the molds wherever we find them and bringing that aspect of telling the stories that matter to us. And Michael was somebody who just, the way I read his life is that he just simply never gave up. And some of the things that he did were like strangely quixotic. but he just never gave up. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I personally get from him. And I think that in telling his story, I would like other people to get from this, that if you're engaged in a creative endeavor and you have the passion for it, life's just going to knock you down again and again and again. Not that life doesn't knock you down in other places, but it's especially visible in creative endeavor. And you just have to pick yourself up and go again if you believe in yourself. The thing that I admire most about MMD, as we call him, is that he had faith in his talent. And that kept him going, and that kept him going. And that was the core and the strength of him. And yes, he wasn't the best, you know, I mean, again, from a businesswoman's perspective, he didn't have his marketing spiel straight, but he never gave up believing in himself. And I think that is an inspiration for anybody who is trying to push their creative talent to the next stage. And I think that when you can make an example of somebody whose work has stood the test of time, and Michael Madhusudan Dutt's work has not only stood the test of time, but it has been appreciated more and more as time has gone on, then that truly can only be an inspiration.
Oh, I mean, I feel exactly the same, and we're coming to the end of our conversation soon. But I will have like Kunal to also kind of give some thoughts on, you know, what your main feelings are about you know, MMD's legacy.
Rebelliousness, you know, goes back to the title of your session. You know, being an iconoclast. And being a romantic, being able to dream, and these are admirable qualities, and with a touch of arrogance. And Michael certainly had his touch of arrogance. These are admirable qualities for people to have, and he was non-strategic. I think that's what Vinita was trying to imply, but. Which is absolutely fine, because he, although he did aspire for recognition and social establishment and all of that, he danced to his own drummer. He listened to his inner voice, and this sense of you know, this what appears to be recklessness in some instances, certainly in some parts of his life, when he was completely out of money, when he was borrowing from Vidyashagar and he was having difficulty paying back, then he kept on dreaming and doing things. It is a part of his personality which contributed to this range of experimentation, this, you know, this risk-taking behavior. His risk-taking behavior in life was synonymous with his risk-taking in his literary life. Okay.
For those, a couple of quick thoughts from you as we come to an end.
Well, I also like the iconoclasm that he did not, you know, he could become this, he had become this, but he didn't stay within that. He seemed to be kicking away things and going on, and not really looking back or not looking forward. There was no plan to what was happening. But there was a plan, because if you look at his poetry and how that was advancing, and how committed he was to it, all of that is absolutely great. But as an English-speaking Bengali, I want to say something here. I really identified with him when I read in one of his letters that the Tattvabuddhini Sabha had given him an award, and he would have to accept it. And he's writing to his friends saying, oh my God, I will have to speechify in Bengali. How can I do that? And this is something that I found him so human and so wonderful, that you're getting an award for writing this epic poem, and you feel you can't make a speech in the language in which you wrote the poem. And I think this kind of self-doubt, self-questioning, self-fashioning that is constantly going on in Madhusudan is very exciting indeed. Vinita, some thoughts that strike you as we come to an end?
I don't know if I can add anything to what Firdaus said that would top that. So I'm going to leave it with Firdaus's words. To everybody who's listening in, I just want to say that if you get an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Michael Madhusudan Dutt, or if you're not familiar with his works, take a moment to look at the man and to look at the works, because he really does belong in the annals of great world poets. And if you haven't had a chance to get to know him a little bit, take the time.
Oh, well, thanks so much to all of you for this great conversation. I'm actually really excited and hoping to actually put on this play in Dhaka to I guess spread the word.
I'm actually hoping to do it in collaboration with you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having that conversation and see what we can do together.
Efforts. I think that would have tickled Michael.
Traversing 6,000 miles or whatever. Anyway, it was wonderful talking to all of you, and I'm delighted to hand the session back to conclude.
Thank you, Vinita, Kunal, Firdaus, and Sadaf for that fascinating session on the life and work of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. A very special thanks to Namita Gokhale and Mala Srilal. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We encourage you to buy the books of our speakers that are available through Brazos bookstore. May I please invite Executive Producer JLF Houston, Suraj Thingra, for the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Rima. Thank you, Namita, Malashri, Vinita, Kunal, Firdaus, and Sadaf for that really fascinating session on the life and the work of the legendary Michael Madhusudan Dutt. And thank you all for being part of JLF Houston 2021. It's never easy to put up a festival together, made be on ground or virtually. Many individuals and organizations, ideas and thoughts come together to make it happen. So as we come to the end of JLF Houston 2021, on behalf of all my colleagues at JLF Houston and Teamwork Arts, I would like to take this opportunity to thank a number of people. To begin with, our wonderful festival co-directors, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, for putting their heart and soul and curating this wonderful program. Our fantastic speakers who joined us from across the globe and created the magic into the festival. Our terrific partners, Asia Society, Imprint, India House, IAAC, and University of Houston. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope next year we are present in person to produce the festival. Our wonderful board of JLF Houston advisors, Sushila and Durga Agarwal, Anjali and Hari Agarwal, Shazma and Arshad Martin, Marie and Vijay Guradia, Stephanie Todd Wong, Rich Levy, Krupa Parekh, Chitra Banerjee Devakurni, Megha and Shashank Karve, and Jiten Agarwal. Thank you for standing by us in all odds and beyond. All our supporters, sponsors, donors, patrons, and friends of the festival. Thank you so much for all the love and warmth we have received from you all. And of course, my lovely colleagues who have worked day and night to make this happen. Sanjoy, Anubhav, Sapna, Neha, Samohan, Sharupa, Farzeen, Srishti, Satyam, and the entire team at Teamwork Arts. Last but not the least, you all, our lovely audience. You are the reason we create the festivals. Without you, we are nothing. So thank you for watching, thank you for supporting, and thank you for being part of the journey. On that note, bidding goodbye for JLF Houston 2021 with a hope that you will join us for JLF New York, the concluding chapter of our JLF North America 2021 virtual series. This is on coming Wednesday, October 20th. For more details, you can log on to our website, www.jlflitfest.org/New York. Thank you once again, and see you for JLF New York.
So in that sense, I want to democratize the story of innovation. I want to make it clear that anyone can do it.
The basic question that a writer asks, I think, is, what should I write about? And, you know, that's the biggest question. You know, there's no help for you either. And it's a total mystery.
But what is common throughout history, throughout time, is that when you have that upstairs, downstairs thing, there's a certain amount of that that you can maintain if you're on top through hard power and hard system.
We're absolutely delighted to be back here with our edition, albeit digitally, of JLF Houston. There are so many wonderful authors and speakers who you will hear over the next few days. And I hope they will power your imagination as they have ours to look into the future, into a brighter tomorrow.